I really hate standing behind him. Can any of you even see me? Thank you, Patricia. So again, welcome to the 8th Annual Teaching and Learning Colloquium. I thought I'd say a little bit about myself, but thank you, Patricia, for the lead up of all the formal things. So as Patricia sort of mentioned, I've been all over the country, and this is my 4th public research university. And so I thought I'd give a little bit of an impression after the end of my second week here about the difference between this institution and the one I just left, which was the University of Oregon, which is in Eugene, Oregon. So this is what I've observed. People drive crazy here. So here's the contrast. In Eugene, everyone is overly polite when they drive, to the point where I would be sitting behind the wheel saying, "You can't stop for that insect in the road. You simply can't because you're going to cause an accident." I am not kidding. It is really close to being that way. That's how nice people are. So to come from there to here, where basically I've got people passing me at 100 miles per hour down Quaker Path Road, that's a difference. Along those lines, Eugene is a very, very bike-friendly city. I mean, very bike-friendly, to the extent that when I moved there from Wisconsin, I was looking at all these really weird painted lines in the road and trying to figure out what they were. I mean, they're all special bike lanes. There's lanes for mass transit, and all things that I had to get used to when I took the driver's test there. Here, I was having a nice chat with a member of the Do It staff, because I'm in the middle of doing one-on-ones with all of my colleagues in Do It. Noticed he was wearing a bicycling t-shirt, and I said, okay, so my husband and I have sort of observed something, so I need to ask you, what's it like to be a casual biker here? And he kind of looked at me. He said, well, I bike on the roads. And I said, oh dear. So it's really that dangerous? And he said yes, and so he suggested some bike paths. Apparently there's a nice one around campus, there's one in Setauket and all that. And he said, there's also a bike club, and they bike in groups, which I think is a lot safer. And I said, that's kind of like the antelope thing, right? So I would be probably one of the bicyclists that would get kicked off in order to let the rest of the herd be safe. So that was one impression. So as not to emphasize the negative here, something that I've noticed in 2 weeks here, though, having one-on-ones with my Do It colleagues, is that something I want to tell all of you, and also it's not just a central IT thing, I've noticed it in speaking with some of my colleagues around campus, is that Stony Brook has accomplished much, much more than you think you have compared to other universities. I want you to know that, and I think it's something you should be very, very proud of in my 2 weeks of observations here. You've done a lot. You are in a lot better place than a couple of the institutions I've come from, where I've had to build things from the ground up. Some of those things are already here or they're in progress. So you should all be very proud of doing all these things with so little resources. So pat yourselves on the back. You're okay at doing that. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking about me, you, everything. And so I'm supposed to be introducing Vivienne, and I have to admit that I'm not going to go through a long bio because it is incredibly uncomfortable for me to stand here when the person I'm talking about, as if she's not in the room, is sitting right there and can probably speak to her life better than I can. But to give you a little bit of an outline of the things that I read in her bio that I thought were, oh wow, this is totally cool. So this might be kind of a weird mishmash, so feel free to come up and hit me if I get it wrong or if I've emphasized the wrong thing. So something I thought was really cool in 2013, Dr. Vivienne Ming, was named one of the 10 women to watch in tech by Inc. magazine. That is super cool. She got a doctorate at Carnegie Mellon, also super cool and impressive. We heard a little bit from her about her thoughts on Pittsburgh last night over dinner. Let's see, and this is one of those things that makes me feel like the world's biggest underachiever. Okay. So Vivienne is a theoretical neuroscientist, technologist, and an entrepreneur. Okay, and something that I think is really cool is that she's co-founded a company called Socos, and the goal of Socos, and dying to talk about the machine learning piece and all that, and the student life outcomes, is that it's to give parents a superpower. Okay, so that's seriously cool. If you want to hear more about that, you can certainly hear it from Vivienne, because I think she could describe it better than I can. And let's see, and I noticed something else is that Vivienne has passions in a whole lot of areas. There are very few people that I could sit and listen to over dinner who could speak to so many different areas with so much depth of knowledge, the ability to talk about other people's work and be able to integrate that into other work in areas that don't seem to fit together. So, without further ado, because again, I hate talking about people as if they're not here, so Dr. Vivienne Ming.
All right, it's always very awkward to have other people talk about you. When I talk about myself, I tend to use very unflattering language like, what the hell is going on with my hair today? I am very disappointed with my experience with my blow dryer today. So I've been asked to come talk about educational technology, which is reasonably appropriate as I've had a couple of ed tech companies and I've poorly taught many a class, I'm a parent, there's a variety of touch points. But I thought I'd try and get across a little bit of my approach to start with. So we're going to start with a very quick look at a couple of non-education projects that I've worked on to give you a sense of how I think we can tackle problems out in the real world. At its core, all of my work is about this idea of maximizing human potential, which kind of sounds like maybe it's a line from Tony Robbins or something, but I mean this in a very concrete way. I'm a hard numbers scientist who pretends to be a businesswoman, and so for me this is really tangible. So when I talk about how can we improve the lives of people, I mean things like this. This is a deep neural network, or what we would now call a deep neural network. This was developed before that language sort of came in vogue. It's learning about faces. It crawled across, at the time, all of Flickr, found all the faces, learned about their structure. And then, being a good entrepreneur, we created an incredibly tasteless game called Sexy Face. On Sexy Face, we'd show you 18 randomly selected faces off of Facebook, and you would select the ones you think are sexy. And the amazing thing is this neural network could learn it. So I think you can appreciate why I'm here to talk about the importance of education and changing lives. No, so here was our promise. You play Sexy Face, and for free, we'll go find everyone on Facebook who you think is sexy. And for $5, we'll find everyone who thinks you're sexy. But the reality is, it's a Trojan horse. The entire system was developed because of a program called Refugees United. So around the world, right now, there are over 1 million orphan refugees in UN camps. And at least at the time we did this project, about 10 years ago, there was just a giant book full of 1 million photographs. And if, say, today you are living in Damascus and you're fearing the worst because you haven't heard from your wife's family in weeks, and you go into Jordan to a refugee camp, they'll give you the book, and you start leafing through it. I hope it's maybe on an iPad now, but I also hope you don't blink when that face that you haven't seen in months slips past you. So in designing this incredibly tasteless game, what we were really doing was training a machine learning system, effectively a deep neural network, to learn how people perceive faces. Now the experience is we select 18 random faces out of the book, and you say, my niece looks a little bit more like this, a little bit more like this. And pretty soon, you are navigating through face space. And what we found is, after 3 or 5 screens, typically about 5 minutes, if your family member is in a camp somewhere, you found them. Thank you. So needless to say, there's a lot of other things we could have done with technology like this. I will be frank, I learned how to do this work at a lab at UC San Diego doing lie detection for the CIA. A little morally gray. Doing things like this, and some stuff I'll talk about later when I talk about work I've done with Google Glass, has really been my approach to actually taking technology and making a meaningful change in someone's life. Here's another example, work I did as an undergrad. This is a convolutional neural network that's learning how to hear. Every little weird function here that you're seeing is essentially simulating an individual cell in the human cochlea. And what's amazing is the solution it comes with, based on information theory, is the same solution that our ears have come up with. And we used that to build a cochlear implant that could learn how to hear all on its own. In other words, creating these bionic people that would otherwise be deaf, but can hear and hear vastly better than a traditional cochlear implant. Here's another little example of this sort of work. This is my son Felix. He was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes 4.5 years ago. Worst Thanksgiving ever. And I was shocked. My wife and I collected copious amounts of data. We're both scientists. It's who we are. When we left the hospital for a month, we wrote down, we kept a Google Doc spreadsheet, and we had everything he ate to the gram, every blood glucose level, all of his activities. Did he have his sniffles? Was he upset? Was he hyperactive? Everything. We crashed Google Docs. And we were so proud of ourselves. We brought this in with us for his first outpatient visit to the doctor, and they were angry with us for wasting their time. As a small aside, if your response in your daily job to what am I supposed to do with this data, your job is not long for this world. It's vastly easier for me to build an AI that can process that data than for me to retrain you, which is going to say a lot about the future of education as well as the future of medicine and pretty much everything else. In this case, we built a system called Jitterbug. My wife and I did a lot of ballroom dance when we were young, so all of my project names are ballroom dance moves. Jitterbug, we hacked all of his systems. His insulin pump, his continuous glucose monitor, he wore a Fitbit, also something called a basis band, all of which, breaking federal law, we had to hack into because none of them shared the data with the parent. It was literally coming out of my son's body, and it wasn't ours. We had to pay them to get summary statistics back on a website. So we hacked them. Little Python code, old Android phone, some fancy USB connectors, and now it's streaming to my server. And we built a model that predicted into the future whether his blood glucose levels will go high or low. And then it sent me updates on my Google Glass. I'm going to talk more about that project later. But this is actually where part of this idea of giving parents a superpower comes from. If any of you happen to have a chronically ill child, imagine the superpower of anywhere you are in the world, you know immediately if they're okay. As someone that wakes up frequently in the middle of the night still today, this was a powerful thing for me. I sit on the board in the She Science Advisor of a company called Emosia. That's based here in New York, actually, and they simply take mobile phones and passively, using the sensor set on the phone, we estimate emotional states. The real purpose of the company, the business plan is around market research, but in engaging with them, I said, let me do something. Let's use this phone system to predict manic and depressive episodes in bipolar sufferers. All you have to do is carry your phone around with you, and periodically you and a set of trusted confidants will get a message. Hey, high probability of a manic episode in the next month. You can take a week off from work and go check in with your doctor, change your dose, if it works for you. For about half of sufferers, medication doesn't work. The suicide rates are horrific. Institutionalization is inevitable for many types of sufferers for whom medication doesn't work. And the medication itself is awful. So there are these various ways that you can approach the problem of how do we make someone's life better? How do we truly maximize human potential, whether it's in health technology, as in some of the cases I've talked about here, or issues as strangely diverse as reuniting orphan refugees, or as I spoke about last night on campus, who should I hire? And how do we take bias out of the hiring system? This is the work last night. This guy named Jade Dominguez, he was a self-taught programmer, never went to college, never held a job, couldn't get a job for a year. No one even said no to him when he sent them a resume, until the algorithms at our company Guild found that he was the second best Ruby developer in all of Los Angeles. We weren't doing him a favor, we were doing us a favor. And these are the kinds of things that get me excited about technology. By the way, the typical response I get to a VC for any of these pitches is, wow, that's amazing. Have you thought of doing financial fraud detection? So it's hard to stay true to your goal of doing something worthwhile, like working in education, when you know what you're building could be a better business plan if you were selling ads, if you were working in the finance industry. But ultimately, you're not having a meaningful impact on the world. How do I have a feeling about this? Well, this is a picture of me when I was little. I take it on other people's opinion that it's a cute picture. I was miserable. I nearly flunked out of high school. I did flunk out of college. I dropped out of life. People cared, my parents cared. My schools made efforts, but no one knew how to get me to actually engage. I slept through my classes. In fact, the most trouble I ever got in my entire academic career was forging letters from my parents to insist that I stay in the honors program. But did someone think I was actually going to do the homework if they put me in a different class? I mean, what sort of perverse sense of we need to maximize her grades is going on here? It's an interesting story because after flunking out of college and taking many years to finally figure myself out, I went back to school and did my entire undergrad in a single year, getting perfect scores in every class. I was the same person at the same school, taking effectively the same classes, although I actually showed up for them. I once wrote on a final exam, I simply wrote please, and otherwise turned it in blank. Didn't work. What an incredible transformation. And I've been pretty dedicated to figuring out how to actually bring that out to the rest of the world. How do you make someone feel like the efforts of their life are actually going to pay off and it's worthwhile to try? So let's talk about educational technology. First, I was asked to talk broadly about the field. And I have pretty strong opinions. Anyone who's ever seen me speak before has been subjected to my psychotic ramblings, and I will stick by them. But I will also acknowledge that they're simply opinions, and other people can feel differently. One of my problems, though, with the ed tech industry is that it's been dominated by bubbles. Everybody thinks MOOCs are going to save the world. And then we find out that, well, they're nice, but they didn't really save the world. And a majority of what I think of as educational technology is helping to decide who goes to Brown versus Princeton. It's a perfectly good business to be in, but you're not really changing anything. I'm interested in how do I change the most number of lives all around the world. And I think there are some things that I would love to dig into. Here are 3 words that I think have lost all meaning if they ever had them. Gamified, personalized, and democratized. And again, in none of these cases are I saying that gamification or personalization are bad things. But someone convinced the technology press that they were the solution to all of life's problems. And they're not. So let's start with the MOOCs. So I know Andrew Ng pretty well. We've collaborated on some research in my life as a neuroscientist. I've met Daphne Koller. I took a class from Udacity's founder back when we were both at CMU. These are good people. But it takes a bunch of Stanford professors to think that the hard part about education is just making information available. The hard part about education is engagement. And Udacity and Coursera and edX and many of the rest found that the hard way. Just simply putting classes online, sure, if you're Andrew Ng, maybe that's all you needed to change the trajectory of your life, because it's ended up so awful with him being a multi-millionaire. And the head of the Stanford AI Lab and a former head of the Deep Brain project at Google and now chief scientist at Baidu. But are you really changing anything with these? Or are they a great tool that we can build on? They sold it. I pick on Coursera in particular because that was their tagline. We're democratizing education. Well, that's a pretty 18th century definition of democracy because, as far as I can tell, the only people that show up for Andrew's machine learning course already have college degrees. We haven't really changed the dynamic of who's doing these things. I gave a talk once and shared the stage with Sal Khan. And when he finished his talk, he called this senior vice president from Comcast up on stage. And they talked about how they were going to wire up 30 million homes around the United States. The obvious implication, though left unspoken, was, and every one of those families the next day are going to go to Khan Academy. Really, do we honestly think that that happened? Is it more than this number of people? It was great for Netflix. I don't know about Khan Academy. Again, you want to change people's lives. You need to figure out how to go and engage with them at a human level. Just build it and they will come is a common fallacy in Silicon Valley. And it simply doesn't hold true. What you need to do is actually go places. And many of these companies have learned it in the years since their founding. They haven't actually figured out business plans for any of them. But they've learned, wow, we actually need to create some sort of meetups in Manila and in Albuquerque so that people can get together and interact with one another and find some support. Udacity completely changed their business plan from being an open education platform to largely being a targeted career training platform for big tech companies. All of which is great, but don't tell the world that you've solved the problem. Because unfortunately, the media loves to consume solutions like that and tell us that this is it, and then the job is done. I will particularly harp on issues of personalization and gamification. Now this may seem strange, as I'm going to go on, I'm going to talk about my own work, and you'll think, isn't that personalization? Well, I use a slightly different definition. And unfortunately, I think the marketing world has completely drained all the meaning out of the term personalization anyways. But this would be an example of typical personalization, which is, I think, I don't remember who produced this figure, but personalization ends up being things like learning paths. We're not actually personalizing anything. We're simply figuring out where on this map is the current student located and what lesson should they do next. Again, it's not a terrible thing, but have you really created a personal learning experience for that child? Whether you're Newton or the Gates Foundation or any of the other proponents of these kinds of learning maps, all of which have their validity, you seem to have convinced the world that we're creating these unique learning experiences which will change the individual lives of kids. Again, you're only changing the lives of kids that actually have access to the technology in the first place. One, and two, we've really, rather than personalizing, we've really decided all kids fit on the same map. And everyone's following the same trajectory. And I simply don't believe that that's true. And the last, I didn't harp on gamification as much as I can. The one thing I can say about gamification is it is phenomenally difficult to get right. I gave a long presentation last night about how incentive systems undermine productivity in the workplace. The exact same thing is true in education. If you want to build a gamified education platform, you need to appreciate that you have set yourself an enormously difficult task. I mean, you're educational technology people in this room, you're probably well aware there are whole conferences on what's called sleazing, where students do this amazingly good job of figuring out how to complete whatever game they're playing without ever learning a damn thing. And it isn't because they're dumb. In my opinion, high-frequency trading is a form of sleazing. And those are some of the smartest people in the world becoming billionaires on the back of gaming a system. So gamification is enormously challenging. And I think, again, we've sold the world on this idea that we can build a game and people will learn. They love playing Minecraft. They love playing Warcraft. Why don't we just play something and every now and then somehow they'll come out the other end understanding the Bohr model of the atom. And it just is, again, I think it is a fiction. The last one is data. A lot of what we do in educational technology is built on this idea that kind of emerges out of lab research, that we have to have perfect data. So we can take an organization like Dreambox into account, and I admire the work that they do. I admire the work of people like Carnegie Learning and others building these highly sophisticated cognitive models. But for their systems to work, they have to control everything. They have to take over the classroom. You want to know why it is most of these big education platforms are considered successful if they don't make student performance worse? I think that's part of the heart of it right there. There's at least one person in the classroom who's doing their damnedest to help those kids, the teacher, and you just marginalize them. What if we could actually go in and take the natural environment of students learning? Not a game experience, not a highly controlled data collection exercise, but whatever they're doing, and turn it simultaneously from just a pure learning experience into some kind of surreptitious assessment, something that the teacher can actually use to improve what they're doing in the classroom, or for that matter, to help parents, give them that superpower. This is one of my favorite truly geeky jokes of all time. This is not the actual example, but I love it. Two mathematicians walking drunkenly down a dark alleyway after getting wasted at a bar. One of them drops his keys and yet keeps walking. The other confusedly stumbles after them until they finally reach a street light, at which the first one drops to his knees and starts searching around. The other one slurs out, "But you dropped your keys back in the alley." And the first one says, "But here I can see what I'm doing." The joke is about nonlinear versus linear math, but I think it's a pretty accurate description of data collection in education. We'd rather take highly controlled data, which is totally artificial, than have to deal with messy, ugly, missing, real-world data where actual learning is taking place. Learning, by the way, which is rich and diverse. You fit everyone into a model. Boy, I hope your students actually fit the model. So, we'll finish my diatribe with this. This is one of my favorite findings. I hate doing this sort of thing, but I'll pull up my little mouse here. Right there is the US average on our Pisa score against child poverty rates. So we're looking at essentially educational equality. And I'm truly solid. There you go. Michael Martyr produced this. We have this idea that we're falling behind because we're not performing well on these international assessments, like PISA and others. But the interesting thing is, when you break out performance, in this case, by the percentage of children in free lunch programs, you see a really interesting story. If fewer than 10% of students in the local student population are on free lunch, we outperform everybody all over the world. And in fact, this holds true if you match it economically. If you then look at the next population, the next quartile, 10 to 25%, it's way up there with the best performers. And you continue to break it down. We know how to do education. We just don't know how to share it equitably. And that's not a shocking statement. But where I come from, we have these amazing technological initiatives in Silicon Valley to change education. Next School is a great example. I admire what Next School is trying to do. Wire up the classroom, make everything captured and recorded. I just said, deal with real-world data. Isn't that great? Well, it's great if you can afford $30,000 a year to educate every one of your kids. That's 10 times as much as my son's charter school gets per student for a year in California. It is vastly more than anyone's ever going to be able to pay outside of economies like the United States. If you really want to solve a problem, I'll pick on another example, the Providence Chalk Project, which I love and inspired a lot of my work. But the Pisa system that they use, the LISA system that they use to collect all of the utterances from the little kids that they're tracking. So if you're not familiar, this is the project where extending on the research showing that kids from low socioeconomic status backgrounds hear 30 million fewer words by age 3 than kids from high SES backgrounds, which great work has been extended at Stanford showing this is a causal relationship. If you can expose kids to more, and more importantly, more sophisticated discursive language, they will perform better, substantially better. So the system that they're using to track it, called Lisa, which is amazing. It records everything you're saying, it distinguishes the speaker from the listener, it will separate out radio and television audio from actual speakers, and then it counts up all the words. Again, it costs more per year than my son's charter school gets. You can't deploy this in much of the United States, much less the rest of the world. So this is the starting point for a little rant I did on stage. My wife and I gave a keynote at South by Southwest EDU, and I said, let's rethink the purpose of education and what we can do with technology. Here is my proposal today, and it won't sound very shocking at first here. The purpose of education is to produce happy, healthy, productive lives and let society reap the benefits. Let me be clear for some of you that don't like words like productive, I just mean impactful. Productivity happens to be a standard measure in literature. I don't care whether you're an artist, a politician, a business leader, a community leader, live an impactful life. That's what education should be about. Nothing else matters. Nothing. I don't care what grades you get. Mine weren't sterling. I don't care how long it takes you to learn something. All I care is that that child will have a happy, healthy, productive life, and that we all selfishly benefit from it. All right, I will get into why that is probably a little more controversial than it might sound on the surface. But let me walk through some of my own work in education. So my first tech company in the education space was a company called Omniscient. I founded it in 2008. And that was where that line actually came from. We went to a bunch of VCs, asked them for money in education. This was long before Coursera or any of these companies picked up prominence. And they said, wow, you can read students' minds. That was their understanding of what I told them. Here's $2 million if you do financial fraud detection. So it wasn't just that they wouldn't fund educational technology, they would pay us to do something different. Well, sucks to that. We actually ended up having to do something different, but very quickly we sold that company because I got sick of selling ads. And we founded another one, and in this another one, my wife and I published a paper. We developed a system that we called Quick Step. We published a paper at NIPS and then a series of educational journals about a very simple system that we built. Every dot you see up here, it always looked like some sort of jeweled tropical bird to me, but every dot in this is actually a student, a week's worth of online discussion posts from undergraduates in a biology course. These are students at University of Phoenix. The one virtue that University of Phoenix has is enormous quantities of data. So this is, I think, something like 15,000 undergrads in biology courses, many different courses. The color coding here shows the progression of time in the course. And then the directionality is that our system, listening to the students talk to each other about biology, learned biology. There were no experts involved. We didn't talk to faculty. It wasn't hand designed. We didn't use textbooks. It learned biology from listening to students having an online discussion about biology. Now, clearly, it's non-normative. All it knew is how students thought about biology. But what was fascinating is, on top of that deep cognitive model, as we call it, we layered a simple system, a logistic regression, one of the simplest forms of, if you would even call it machine learning. And we predicted from those models the grade the student would get in the course. Trained it all. Now, we did the same thing in an MBA class for economics. Now, 10,000 new students entered those two courses with new faculty and new assessments. And we were never looking at any of the assessments or the homeworks anyways. At week one, just listening to them talk to each other, we know what grade they would get in the class. As the course progressed week by week, we knew with greater and greater accuracy what they would get wrong or right on the final exam. Now, the typical response to that is wow, that is cool and spooky. But our goal was very simple. If we could tell you that these 5 students are going to fail your course, given how you're going to teach it, isn't there something different you can do? Now this was a little bit naive though. As very proud as I am of this work, it is naive to think that someone that has a 70-hour-a-week job, for which they're only getting paid 40, can take another 20 hours, learn a new technology, and go save these 5 kids, or 50 kids, or whatever level of education you're at. We learned the hard way that simply providing information to people was not enough. In fact, it's a general mantra I have in all of my work nowadays, in labor research and education and health technology. People need answers, they don't need more data. As proud as I am of this, it didn't feel like it was enough. It also, even though we weren't trying to make an automated grading system, we were really trying to make something that allowed teachers to essentially teach to competence. There was another aspect of this which was a problem, which I spoke about a little bit yesterday for anyone who happened to have been at that talk, which is I took 2 years out from my work in education to be chief scientist in a company called Guild, which I mentioned earlier. We essentially built these big machine learning systems to try and take bias out of the hiring process. Bias broadly defined, not just race and gender, but are you overvaluing the school degree? Are you undervaluing this skill set? Well, what are some of the things we found were not predictive of people's ability on the job? Their grades and their test scores. So now we've got this very fancy AI system that can predict something which isn't predictive. Now, I don't think that it is completely valueless to focus on content and making certain students understand things. Being able to program, to read well, to factorize a polynomial, these are amazing tools. But here's the metaphor I use nowadays. It's a tool and a craftsman. And what we found is that while education is generally about 99% focused, at least on the assessment side, on the tools, the skills, and the knowledges, they aren't predictive of anything. It's all about the craftsman. Now, you probably are familiar with all of the discussion around soft skills, non-cognitive skills, 21st century skills, SEL, all these sorts of things. Well, I love, of all of them, the one I like the least is 21st century skills. Someone did, a computational linguist did an analysis of the writing of historical leaders and found that actually 21st century skills were incredibly valuable in the 16th century. So all of these things, though, broadly defined, that's what we found was actually predictive. 20-year-old programmer, 35-year-old salesperson, 50-year-old CEO. I got invited down to Red Bull to study the world's best extreme sports athletes. Held true of them also. Clearly not grades. And this is where my life in education and labor research converged. It's the same thing that decades of research on life outcomes is shown as predictive in 4 and 5-year-olds. General cognitive ability, metacognition, mindset, which includes constructs like mindset, grit, endogenous motivation, creativity, and emotion regulation, including the ability to understand the emotions of other people. We found this was it. This is what was predictive of the quality of work that people did and of the life outcomes of young kids. Well, what if we focus on that? What if that is what we did as an education system? We didn't care about the grades. I don't care whether you know all the state capitals in 5th grade. I don't care whether you can start to factorize a polynomial your freshman year in high school. What I care about are these qualities, and everything else is just something we're doing to pass the time. Well, we have some clues of what that would do. Great piece of research. It was published about 1.5 years ago. It looked at a program run in Kingston, Jamaica 25 years ago. It was an intervention program designed by University College London, but it was executed by the local Kingston government. Social workers went to the home of severely at-risk toddlers in the Kingston area. Worked not with the kids, but with their parents. on what we would call social-emotional parenting. They taught them little games they could play with their kids. There was a parallel program that focused on nutrition. It lasted 2 years, and then they ran out of budget, and the whole thing ended. 2 years, 1 hour a week, teaching games to the parents to play with their kids. And then 20 years passed, and no one did anything. Group of economists from UC Berkeley, University of Chicago, one of them has a Nobel Prize. They go down and study these kids, now adults. They earn 25% more than their at-risk peers. They're economically indistinguishable from the general population. Their best shot of getting out of the slums before was to go to prison. Now, they're a part of the broader Princeton community. They spend less time incarcerated. In fact, in follow-up research by some good friends of mine, they found that they literally live longer. They have lower cortisol levels, a hormone related to stress response, which is highly correlated with health outcomes. If you will simply take my word with it, given the correlations in the literature, these people are leading healthier, happier, more productive lives from such a simple set of interventions. So that got me wondering, if we focused on that, and I will talk about college-age education as well here in a minute, but if we focused on that, if we looked at the 50 million kids in the United States, and we simply assumed that we could scale out these types of interventions across all 50 million kids, and we started doing it 25 years ago, what would happen? Well, you pay a big upfront cost. It's not trivial, but it's not overwhelming. And then after a few years, you'll start to see some savings. Initially, education savings. It simply costs less to educate these kids. I'm not saying it would because we modeled it that way. I'm saying it would because there are dozens of papers that show this as their empirical finding across large sets of kids. Then you start to see some savings in healthcare. Then you start to see some substantial savings in healthcare. Then those kids hit the job market. You see the productivity gains. All along the way, we take all those savings and the gains, and we just index it to the stock market. Where would we be today? Well, we found it would add somewhere between 1.3 and 1.8 trillion dollars a year to the US economy. Simply doing things that we already know work. Not inventing a new technology. The only technology here is how do we scale it out? Simply doing things we know work. Could I have been wildly off with all the compounding interest? Absolutely. It was very nice then that in this particular figure, it's the Near Americas Foundation, and then McKinsey bookended us. New Americas Foundation did a simple regression. They looked internationally at educational equity versus GDP. They found the US to be an unsurprising outlier. If we simply had the educational equity of the rest of the world, they estimated it would add $1 trillion a year to the US GDP. McKinsey, being slight fabulous, said, imagine we were as good as Finland and there was no inequality in America. That's a wonderful aspiration. They pegged it around $2 to $4 trillion a year. I'm happy with my number. $1.5 trillion a year that we leave on the table because 25 years sounds like a really long time. And why should I help someone else's kid anyways? Aren't they just going to compete with my son to get into college? Well, add up all the direct savings that I just talked, all the direct impact, 25% more earnings. So you're going to earn $20,000 a year, now you're going to earn 25. That makes a real difference in people's lives. It doesn't come anywhere near $1.5 trillion. The vast majority of that gain in the economy comes back to all of us. It is simply economic growth. You want to float out boats? Make it rain from below. That's the way to do it. I threw out this proposition over dinner last night, and this is just purely a thought experiment. But any of you are thinking of sending your kids to private school? I'm willing to bet that the global impact on your child would be more positive to send them to public school and send an at-risk kid in their place. Your kid's well set from the life you've already aligned them on. I'm willing to bet that their life would be better if you took the opportunity to help the other kid. So what is my approach to that? My company Sokos recently built, oh, there's some missing graphics here, but that's okay. Recently built a system we called Muse. So this started as a project we did jointly with UT Austin. We put microphones in the classroom. Fancy mics? No, Radio Shack mics. This is this desire, something we could do in rural Liberia or in rural New Mexico, and then we have to deal with the fact that it's a low quality mic. We have to deal with the fact that there are 30 kids all talking, and all we have is an audio recording of it. So we ran this project with them where we recorded everything those kids said in the classroom, everything that gets said back to them, and then we did this very modest thing. We literally predicted their life outcomes. How long they'll live, how far they'll go in their education, how much money they'll make, and how happy they'll be. That should sound scary. What is interesting, though, is that we never share that with anyone. Turns out it only makes things worse anyways. Pretty well-studied phenomenon. If I tell you your daughter's going to win a Nobel Prize, I just made it less likely to happen. So instead what we would do, and also I don't want it to come true. I don't care how positive the prediction is. It can always be better. So we sent a single text message home every night. Parent, here's the one thing you can do tonight that'll have the biggest impact on your child's life. Hey Dad, Maria's really interested in seahorses right now. Take 15 minutes and talk to her about seahorses. Really easy to do, highly actionable, specifically about her. Maria's not a real name, but that is a real message that was sent by our system. Hey Dad, turned out in this population, largely migrant workers, it was an English immersion course for Spanish-speaking kindergartners. Dads do a lot of family stuff. But in this population, school just isn't one of them, isn't part of the job description of being dad. So the system learned specifically signal dad. Maria's really interested in seahorses right now. All week, we picked up on her chattering about seahorses. By the way, as an aside, the technical issue of isolating a single speaker off of 3 mics in a classroom was by far the hardest thing we had to do for this project. Maria's chattering away about seahorses. No one else was talking about it. It was not part of the curriculum material for that week. So it was an endogenous interest of Maria's. That's one of the most predictive constructs that we found. So imagine you're Maria, 5 years old, you get home that night from school, and like magic, your dad starts talking to you about seahorses. Did we signal him to read? No, talk. Why? Well, one, where is he going to find a book about seahorses? But actually, our system predicted that if we signaled him to read, he's less likely to do it. My goal isn't to send an optimal action. It is the action that's actually going to have the biggest impact, which includes, is the parent going to do it? And then talk for 15 minutes. I'd rather he bought a plane ticket and he took her to the Baltimore Aquarium, but that's not going to happen. 15 minutes of talking in Spanish is going to happen, and our system predicted that's the biggest impact that that family's going to have that night. Now we have a system that we're sharing both philanthropically and with large companies as an employee enrichment program, where my son breaks out the crayons and draws a picture. I snap a photo to share with his grandma, I CC Muse, and it comes into our system. My daughter tells me a story, I hit a button, grab 30 seconds of her talking, or 5 minutes of us reading a book together. Totally voluntary in both of those cases. You need never share anything. In addition to that, once a day we ask a single question. Now on the fancy machine learning side, what we're actually doing is predicting every single parent's answer to thousands of questions every day. And then our system says, if I knew the true answer to one question, which one's going to be the biggest information gain? Not just for this family, but for all families. Because I know your kids are very similar, so the system automatically asks you very different questions. It turns out, after we run this for a few weeks, we have pretty solid estimates of everyone's answer to every question, even though we only ask one single question a day. So integrate those 3 inputs together, and we leverage our life outcome prediction technology. Truth is, we don't even bother to predict the life outcomes. They're all mediated through what my wife and I wrote a white paper about. It's called meta-learning, those 5 qualities I talked about earlier. General cognition, metacognition, mindset, creativity, and emotion. Those are super categories of which there's dozens of constructs that co-vary underneath them. So actually what we're focusing on is optimizing those. Every message, we're going to nudge this kid to live a little bit longer, go a little bit further in their education, to have a bigger impact when they grow up, to to be a little bit happier. And importantly, these are fundamentally personalized experiences. Why? Well, actually, there was a great paper that came out recently by the same friends that did the work with the cortisol levels. They showed that while grit is a general purpose, strong predictor of education outcomes, income, and happiness and health outcomes in the general population, with African American men from low-income backgrounds, it is a positive predictor of income and education attainment. It is a negative predictor of health. Now, the speculation is around what the mechanisms are there. The two that were posited in the paper is, one is about sort of having to constantly check yourself and enmeshing yourself in what it meant that you grew up in one sort of community and now you live in another. The other is the idea that you sort of take your whole family along with you, your whole community, and you have to carry that. Purely speculation. But what held really strongly, though, was the correlation. That these are qualities which pay off in some dimensions, but not in others. They're not universals. So knowing what the right thing to do in isn't a universal. We actually piloted a similar technology inside of college classrooms. In this particular case, our goal was to find the moment, not invent a technology in search of someone willing to use it, but what's something that just sucks about being a professor, a teacher, a TA? Well, grading is one of the main things. And it's particularly challenging for me because I'm not a particularly social person, so I don't even know anyone in my class, not in a really deep level, that's going to give me insight into how to connect with them and get them really motivated for the class. So I've got 100 essays, and I write my feedback, and I say, gosh, I would really have loved to see these other two things in your essay, but I guess this is good enough, B. Not that that's the greatest feedback to give in the world, but say compare that with, hey, really enjoyed reading your essay. Next time let's focus on these two things, B. Same content, same grade, completely different sentiment of the feedback. Turns out what we discovered working with this very large university was for about 11% of students, even if they were consistently passing their classes, if they got harsh or critical feedback, they were 80% more likely to drop out of the entire degree program. Quit everything, even though they were on track to graduate and get their degree. We found 9% of students at that same university did better when they got a regular kick in the ass. So, I don't know. What am I supposed to do with any of my students? Err on the side of being gentle with everyone? Be neutral with everyone? So we built this system. In the moment the faculty were grading, all of the grading at this university being done online, a little thing like Clippy would pop up and say, hey, Maria needs more gentle feedback. And underneath that, again, this is a real intervention that was deployed. Beneath that, it would say, students like Maria that received harsh or critical feedback are 80% more likely to drop out of the degree program. So right in the moment of offering your feedback, we offered this corrective feedback on how best to connect with Maria. By the way, we're also developing a similar technology to work on Wall Street to help managers get the most out of their employees, because shock of all shocks, people tend to work better with people that are just like them. So it tends to marginalize everyone that's not around Wall Street, which strongly means, participates a lot of gender and racial bias. So this has been my approach to this sort of work. I spoke about this a little bit last night, so I'm not going to belabor it here. This is Rodney Mullen, the world's greatest skateboarder, and he was part of the people that we studied to look at what predicted life outcomes. And I'll just offer this one anecdote. He and I sat down for lunch together. He won 59 world championships in a row. And I said, what would you do after you won a world championship? And he said, well, Tony Hawk and I would go to the after party and drink some champagne, and then, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes later we'd be out back practicing new moves. He likes to party. He didn't have any problem with being at a party. He just couldn't help himself. He'd won his 40th world championship in a row. No one was going to beat him. He didn't need to practice. It's just who he was. I want to be able to create that in students. We're focused so much on incentive systems in education. And yes, for example, gamification is explicitly an incentive system. So are grades. So is getting your students to be quiet. Yet what we found was the best performers invariably had the following quality. They were incentive insensitive. Your best salespeople made sales the day after the end of the sales cycle. Nobody cares. Your best software developers pushing code when the product's already ready for release. I told this story of this woman in the Berkeley Ed School who shared a hallway with my office. Her office was at one end of the hallway, her lab was at the other, and whenever she was done in her office, whoosh, she'd run past my door. Wow, she had this incredible experiment that was about, she had to run. No, it's education research. Nothing so shocking is going on that you need to run down the hallway. She ran down the hallway because it was a waste not to. Why walk down the hallway? I'm done in the office, now it's time to do research. So she'd run past everyone voting on her tenure because that's who she was. I want to create that in every kid. I want that to be the focus of our education system. From preschool all the way through graduate school, we should be figuring out how to align our education with our students rather than aligning our students with our educational incentives. And this is a profoundly difficult problem, but one which we as technologists can actually address. I had a picture of my son, so I have to have a picture of my daughter. But the core of what I do nowadays, a lot in education, a lot in talent and labor research, is this idea of how do we engineer environments for success. I'm going to give you a very simple example of one. It isn't a technological solution at all. It's a bridge program. Bridge programs are notoriously underperforming. You have these top students, you give them a whole year-long course on how to prep for college, and they still drop out at huge levels. And it's frustrating. So here's a bridge program that works amazingly well. Runs at UC Riverside for Latinas. By Supreme Court decision, the UC system has no flexibility on admissions or graduation. So they have this very simple idea. What if we had a program just for Latinas? They did it in their final year of high school together. And then all of them that meet admission standards are jointly admitted to a program that continues inside UC Riverside on the other side. So you show up with friends, people you actually know. And if none of them got in, at least there are a group of other young women just like you. And they went from graduating in the single digits to graduating at higher rates than the general population. And all they did was change the social environment in which these young women were engaging in exactly the same tasks. It's the same place, it's the same what, it's the same material, but they changed the experience. They engineered that environment for success. I think there's even more we can do when we bring technology to bear, that we can empower teachers, we can empower parents in really profound ways. And so, to me, the core things that really interest me about educational technology are equity. Far too often, we think, what could we do if we had our entire wish list of the fanciest technologies? I don't think you're solving a real world problem. You're just adding to the educational arms race. The people that will benefit from that are already off to a huge advantage over everyone else in the place. What can you do with the most ubiquitous, lowest quality technology that you have access to? Natural systems. Stop trying to control the classroom. Start thinking, I wonder what I can build a test for. And start thinking, what's going on in this room right now? And what could I deploy at low cost that could drive an insight? My work in predicting talent in labor markets was based on scraping the digital footprint from public information on 100 different websites worldwide. We didn't give people a test. There was no system where we went out and said, show me on a whiteboard that you know how to program, which, again, is a known highly biased exam. We said, what is every student or employee doing in the real world Students learn for 200 days a year, and then we take them into an artificial environment and test them for 10 days to see whether they learned anything. That doesn't make any sense to me, particularly as a neuroscientist when I know that the cells in our brain respond fundamentally differently to natural stimuli than to artificial ones. And the final one is active engagement. The core philosophy behind our Muse system, the one I described with the photos and the activity recommendations, is engage with those parents. Don't try and build an AI that's going to tutor kids. I'm not fundamentally against that. But why are you solving a problem that doesn't exist? A recent research study out of China, particularly rural China, found that there were profoundly high levels of learning delays and motor development delays amongst this large population of students, a big swath of whom got left behind by their parents that had to go work in the factory towns. So what can we do to make a difference there? Their parents care. They want to do the right thing. They just don't know what it is. Is it possible? And I feel the same way about most professors. I have some that I admired when I was a grad student and an undergrad, and others that I did not. And generally, that admiration was much more about the research they did than the teaching. I sort of gave them all a pass. They didn't know what they were doing. They cared, but unfortunately, the educators in college are often not educators. But I genuinely think that they care. If you make it easy to be an educator, if you as experts can give them the tools they need, the superpower, to actually know what's going on in a kid's head and to do the right thing next, then you have the opportunity to keep the promise of educational technology. So what I'm really interested in is not, in fact, about technology at all. To me, machine learning is just a tool. I don't geek out about it, sometimes I do. But I don't love it. I do it because it's a tool. I happen to have it in my arsenal, and it's one that is very effective in the modern world. But I'm just as happy to pay someone else to do it for me. What it really is about is improving the lives of people. It's about making more powerful people, not more powerful technology. So, thank you very much.